Have you heard of the Morgenthau family? In this video, author Andrew Meier discusses his newest book, Morgenthaus, Power, Privilege, and the Rise of an American Dynasty, and how the family influenced American history throughout the 20th century. Hello, it's Victoria from HEC Books, where we interview authors about their latest books. If you're new, make sure to click the subscribe button, and make sure to stick around to find out how to read an excerpt from the book and listen to a sample from the audiobook. Now, let's meet our latest guest. Andrew Meier, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much. Great to be here.
Now, I know that you have said before that this is a labor of love, and it was somewhat laborious. The book is lengthy.
It's a 3-pound book, works well as a doorstop, and it's a beautifully designed, I think, cover. It's a very long book.
Outside of New York City and New York State, I'm sure people are going to, who are the Morgenthaus? I'm guessing much of the country, the rest of America, knows very little, thus this book.
Most New Yorkers, as you say, absolutely right, know the name, know something about the name. They certainly knew about the DA. A lot of Americans know Law and Order, the TV show that he inspired. You know, the DA was a central inspiration to that show and all the shows that it spawned. And in Washington, people know. But across the country, people don't know. And I really say this, and I'm not joking, dip in wherever you want. If you're interested in, and we'll talk about this, I hope, but briefly, if you're interested in the Kennedy years, dip into the Kennedy years, and you'll learn about Robert Morgenthaus was with Bobby Kennedy the day that his brother Jack was shot in Dallas. That is untold history, and many people are fascinated by that. Or if you're interested in the New Deal, Henry Morgenthaus Jr. was Secretary of Treasury for almost 12 years, one of our longest serving cabinet members in history. Did not have a college degree, failed out, as you know, from prep school. Roosevelt's very, very close friend was.
He called him what? Henry the Morgue? What did he call him? Henry the Morgue?
Henry the Morgue. They had this really bizarre and kind of warm bromance, very warm. What I find so fascinating and really rewarding is that what other American family, and this is as I was researching and digging, it occurred to me, what other American family had across at least 3 generations, leaving aside Lazarus? He was part inventor, part gambler, and at least one part con man, and ends up alone, destitute, in a room.
Right.
Yeah, but out of that comes this dynasty of at least 3 generations, and they're still going strong, that Americans don't really know. And, you know, other than the Adams, 2 presidents, the Adams, the Bushes, yeah, but that's 2 generations, not 3. And it's really kind of extraordinary that they're not better known. And, you know, I think that the early response to the book shows just that. Yeah, people are like, wait, what is that family, or who is that, or how do you pronounce that? And wait a minute, how could we not have known? Because they were right there next to Woodrow Wilson, right next to FDR and Mrs. Roosevelt, arguably the most important figure in the history of American women, not just the 20th century, but probably even today. Henry Morgenthaus was really, I think, deeply misunderstood. I knew very little about him. I knew about sort of the Morgenthau plan, his idea for Germany after the war, and I knew that he had been Secretary of the Treasury. I didn't know more than that 10 years ago. And that's really the heart of the book, the relationship between the Roosevelts, Mrs. Roosevelt, and Henry's wife, Eleanor. They were the only couple that they really were close to and socialized with. You know, the Roosevelts had a pretty complicated political marriage, probably the most complex in American history. And they were close, both the wives and the men, very close. And Henry was with FDR the night before he died. So if you're interested in that.
You were the first to know about his ailment, correct?
That's
it
right.
was kept secret as best they could back then, and which was easier than today, for sure. But
right.
Did I read that he?
Absolutely right, and that's something that I didn't know. The intimacy that they had. You know, as you said, he was known. FDR liked to kid him and tease him. You know, you're Henry the Morgue, and there are hundreds of books, obviously, about Roosevelt, thousands. And Henry Morgenthaus is often the kind of glum stooge who does everything for Roosevelt, from devising these extraordinary budgets during the New Deal, but also literally fetching his liquor during Prohibition, which he did.
Well, they first met because didn't his father, he was one of the few of the many children who just didn't seem to have any aspirations. So he buys them land. And it happens to be next to the Roosevelts, correct? Isn't that how they met?
That is how you met. Well, we don't know precisely when the Morgenthaus met the Roosevelts, but it was probably at the Democratic Convention in 1912. And Bob Morgenthau, the DA, he met every single president since Calvin Coolidge, when I think he was 7 years old. So they were at, the edges of the highest levels of power in America for 100 years. It's kind of astounding that they weren't better known, that they aren't better known.
So let's talk about Bob, the district attorney. He was really one of the most well-known Morgenthaus, at least in modern day. He worked till he was 90. He was the longest serving district attorney in the history of New York City, and later became known as the boss. And that was under when he was worked for the feds.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. He was known as the boss. He was known, when I got to know him, he was 89 years old, and he was going to run again for a 9th term. He had already, he was going to run for a 10th term, as DA of Manhattan. And he had a slogan. Victoria, his slogan was 90 in '09. And I actually thought it was a pretty good political slogan. And everyone thought he would run, and he probably, almost certainly, would have won at 90 years old. And he was introduced always at events as DA and DA for life. The influence that he had here, the power that he had in New York City, was unmatched. It's the second highest political office in New York City. And they call themselves the Morgenthau Army. They don't like to talk very loudly, but the lawyers and the judges and people in foundations and political life and corporate life who have come out of his office, whether he was almost 10 years as the chief federal prosecutor, as you said, in New York, which a lot of Americans know now because of the former president, Donald Trump, and his legal concerns having to do with the Southern District. That was Morgenthau's district. And then it becomes Rudy Giuliani's district. And Morgenthau is really the guy who, as you said, recreates that office and expands it. And suddenly, across the country, in St. Louis, Chicago, Dallas, LA, federal prosecutors in the 1960s get more power and, for better or worse, get more power and greater control of their jurisdiction. In fact, Morgenthau would say that his jurisdiction, because there are banks in New York, the financial capital of the world, his jurisdiction is the world. And he did that even as DA. As a county prosecutor, his jurisdiction was the world, because if one buck crosses a bank in Manhattan, that gives him jurisdiction. Wow. So there's this Morgenthau army out there, and they're across the country. DAs in Colorado, judges, more than 80 judges have come out of his office, including the most famous, Sonia Sotomayor, on the Supreme Court. I
didn't realize that till I read the book. Yeah, I did not realize that. He
has, as you rightly point out, he has this lasting influence, and we may not know the name, and more people are learning. Oh, that's why when President Obama introduced Sonia Sotomayor, when he nominated her to the court, he said Morgenthau was there, and he said the legendary Bob Morgenthau. And so that was the kind of history that fascinated me, and I tried to bring out.
Were you granted unrestricted access?
Well, it's a little more complicated than that. It's not an authorized biography. I didn't get permission, but without his kind of silent blessing, I learned very quickly. There's no way I was getting near anything. Public archives I could have gotten to, but I went to, a very quick story, I went to go see a judge. I interviewed many, many judges, federal judges, local judges, and right away they said, does the DA know, or does the boss know about this? And the phone call would come, it's okay. So it was that kind of a thing. It was hard to find people early on who were his critics. There weren't really many rivals. I sought out every critic I could find because, as you say, I am first and foremost a journalist. And as a biographer, I like to try to practice this thing, which we call investigative nonfiction. So I'm not taking a side. I'm trying to find, ideally, the paper, the first documents, or the people who really have firsthand knowledge. So I was looking for critics, rivals, ex-politicians, judges, prison guards. I did, and I'm still probably doing it. As the book comes out and we're excerpting it, there was an excerpt recently in the New York Times, and people got in touch with me. I will talk to them. I will interview them, because it's all about trying to get as complete a picture and as accurate a picture as I can. And I think, really, to answer your question, that's what the DA liked.
Thanks for watching. And to find an excerpt from the Morgenthau book and hear a sample of the audiobook, click on the link in the description to go to Meier's website and scroll down. Stay tuned for the second part of the Andrew Meier interview, where we learn a little more about the Morgenthau legacy. And if you enjoyed this video, please click the thumbs up and subscribe for new content.